Here's something psychology research keeps finding that surprises people. Highly intelligent people rarely look the way we expect them to. We picture someone with a very high IQ as obviously brilliant, always speaking, solving problems out loud, quoting things, correcting people, making sure the room knows. But that's not what the research shows. What cognitive psychologists actually find is quieter, subtler, and in some ways harder to spot because many of the most intelligent people you'll ever meet look, on the surface, like they're doing very little at all. Here are the psychological patterns that show up again and again in people with extremely high IQs. Not the myths, the real ones. The ones backed by research and probably recognized by anyone watching this. The first pattern is spending a lot of time alone. Not because they dislike people, not because they're antisocial or damaged or afraid, but because their brains are running a process that requires space. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for complex thinking, planning, and reflection, does its best work when it isn't being pulled in 17 directions at once. For highly intelligent people, solitude isn't emptiness. It's the condition under which the most interesting thinking happens. Research from the London School of Economics found something striking. Highly intelligent individuals actually report lower life satisfaction with frequent social interaction than people with average IQs. Not because people drain them, but because their minds crave something that crowds rarely provide. Quiet, room to think, space to follow an idea all the way to the end without being interrupted. The person who leaves the party early, who prefers one long conversation to 10 short ones, who seems perfectly content spending a Saturday entirely alone. That's not a red flag. That's a brain that knows what it needs. The second pattern is relentless curiosity about everything. Not just the big questions, the small ones, the ones nobody else bothers to ask. Why do people behave differently when they think no one is watching? Why does this particular system work the way it does? Why did that person phrase it that way instead of any other way? The highly intelligent brain doesn't experience the world as something to move through. It experiences it as something to examine. Patterns everywhere, questions everywhere, an internal engine that runs on wondering. And here's what's important to understand about this curiosity. It doesn't feel optional. It's not something they choose to do. It's something their brain does automatically, to everything, all the time, which can be exhausting, and which can make ordinary conversations genuinely difficult. Because ordinary conversations don't always leave room for the 6 questions that just appeared in the back of their mind. The third pattern is talking to themselves. This one surprises people, but it shouldn't. Psychologists call it self-directed speech, and research consistently shows that it serves a real cognitive function. It improves focus, strengthens working memory, and helps the brain organize complex thoughts in real time. For highly intelligent people whose internal processing is particularly active, narrating that processing out loud isn't a quirk. It's a tool, a way of externalizing an internal conversation that's moving faster than it can be silently managed. The person muttering to themselves while working through a problem, quietly rehearsing what they want to say, thinking out loud in a room they thought was empty. That's not distraction. That's an active cognitive system doing exactly what it was built to do. The fourth pattern is being genuinely comfortable saying, "I don't know." This is one of the most counterintuitive findings in intelligence research, and one of the most important. You'd think that people with high IQs would be more confident in their knowledge, more certain, more willing to declare definitive answers. But research on the Dunning-Kruger effect shows the opposite. The Dunning-Kruger effect describes the tendency for people with limited knowledge in a domain to dramatically overestimate their competence. And the flip side, on the part that gets less attention, is that highly knowledgeable, highly intelligent people tend to underestimate theirs. Because the smarter you are, the more clearly you can see how much you don't know. The more complexity you can perceive in a question that looks simple, the more exceptions you can generate to any rule you just stated. "I don't know" isn't a defeat for a highly intelligent person. It's an accurate description of a complex reality, and they'd rather say it than pretend otherwise. The fifth pattern is overthinking things that seem small. An analytical brain doesn't have an off switch. The same cognitive machinery that processes complex problems also runs on simple ones. A text message, a decision about where to eat, a remark someone made in passing 3 days ago that still doesn't quite make sense. From the outside, this looks like indecision, like anxiety, like someone who can't just let things go. From the inside, it's a brain running multiple mental models simultaneously, exploring possible interpretations, possible consequences, possible meanings, because that's what it does with every input it receives. Not by choice, by design. Consider this for a moment. How many times has someone told a highly intelligent person to just relax, to stop overthinking it, to let it go? And how many times did that advice actually help? It rarely does, because the overthinking isn't a habit they can drop. It's the same engine that produces everything else they're capable of. You don't get one without the other. The sixth pattern is a sophisticated sense of humor. This one is backed by hard data, and it makes complete sense once you understand why. Humor is cognitively demanding. Creating or appreciating a genuinely good joke requires the brain to recognize patterns, violate expectations in precisely the right way, and connect ideas that don't obviously belong together, all in real time. Studies published in cognitive psychology and intelligence research journals have found a measurable, consistent correlation between higher IQ and more advanced humor processing. Highly intelligent people tend to appreciate humor that's subtle, dry, built on unexpected connections rather than obvious setups, the kind that rewards attention, and they tend to use humor as a form of communication, a way of saying something real without the vulnerability of saying it directly. A test sometimes of whether someone in the room is following along. If you've ever laughed at something and looked around to find you're the only one who got it, you know exactly what this pattern feels like. The seventh pattern is changing their minds, freely, without treating it as a defeat. Most people experience changing their mind as a kind of loss, a concession, an admission that they were wrong, something to be avoided if possible. For highly intelligent people, it's closer to the opposite. They tend to hold beliefs as working models rather than fixed identities. When new evidence appears, better data, a more compelling argument, a perspective they hadn't considered, the model updates, not reluctantly, almost automatically. Psychologists call this cognitive flexibility, and it's one of the most reliable markers of advanced problem-solving ability. The person who says, you know what, you're right, I hadn't thought about it that way, without visible discomfort. The person who reads something that contradicts everything they believed yesterday and says interesting instead of wrong. That's not weakness. That's a mind that values accuracy more than consistency. The eighth pattern is late-night thinking. Many people with high IQs report being significantly more mentally active at night, more creative, more focused, more alive than at any other time of day. Some researchers connect this to evolutionary psychology, suggesting that cognitive flexibility and the ability to adapt to non-traditional patterns develop together. Others point to the absence of social demands at night, the quiet, the permission to think without being interrupted, as the key variable. Whatever the reason, the pattern is consistent. The ideas that arrive at midnight, the problems that untangle at 2 a.m., the clarity that comes just before sleep, too late to be useful, too vivid to ignore. The highly intelligent person who is inexplicably most awake when they're supposed to be asleep isn't fighting their schedule. Their mind is simply operating on its own. The ninth pattern is observing more than speaking. In conversations, highly intelligent people often spend more time watching than talking, not because they have nothing to say, often quite the opposite, but because they're gathering information first, reading the room, tracking the emotional dynamics, noticing the gap between what people are saying and what they seem to actually mean. They respond thoughtfully rather than quickly. They ask one precise question rather than filling silence with words. They notice things other people walked right past. This gets misread constantly. The quiet person in the room is often assumed to be disengaged, uncertain, or unimpressive. Sometimes they're the most focused person in the building, running a far more complete analysis of the situation than anyone who's been talking the whole time. What looks like passivity is often pattern recognition happening faster than it can be spoken. The 10th pattern is a constant search for meaning, not always dramatically, not always philosophically. Sometimes it's just a quiet question that never quite goes away. Why do we organize society this way? Why do people make the choices they make? Why does this feel meaningful and that doesn't, even when the world says it should be the other way around? High intelligence often comes with heightened awareness of complexity in relationships, in systems, in the gap between how things are and how they could be. And that awareness naturally generates questions about purpose, about whether what you're doing matters, about what a well-lived life actually looks like. This isn't existential crisis. Though it can become that, there's nowhere to put it. More often, it's just depth. A mind that keeps going past the surface of things because stopping there never felt like enough. Here's what connects all 10 of these patterns. They're all in some way expensive. Expensive in energy, in relationships, in the gap between how you experience the world and how the world seems to expect you to experience it. The highly intelligent person who learned early that their intensity was too much, that their questions were exhausting, that their need for solitude looked like rejection, that their humor landed wrong, that their mind was an asset in the right context and completely isolating in the wrong one. If any of that resonates, this isn't a video about how special you are. It's a reminder that the way your mind works has a name, that the patterns you've noticed in yourself show up in research, that you haven't been imagining it. Intelligence isn't a superpower, it's a particular way of being in the world, with particular gifts and particular costs. And understanding both is where it actually gets useful.